Welcome everyone to the February Focus Series. If it's your first time joining the Focus Series, it's great to have you here. So the monthly Focus Series is where we take 30 minutes to zoom in on one topic or one conversation with the aim of enabling better client conversations. And also that there's takeaways that you can practically incorporate into your client's engagement process. So today's topic is designing better client takeaways. What do we mean when we talk about client takeaways? Often in these sessions, we focus in on those moments where you're sitting in front of the clients and you're engaging and how to make that even more engaging and a better experience for the client. But in this session, we're going to focus on what do we leave the client with after each of those engagements? What's that takeaway that the client takes with them? And how do we make it as engaging as the meetings that we have with them? And when we start talking about different client takeaways, there's a lot of things to think about. The first being that clients, we're taking them on a journey and there are different steps in that journey. And it might be, a 6-step process or a 10-step process, but, generally there's these 4 areas that we're taking clients through. And the first is that initial engagement where we unpacking with them and gathering their information and arriving at where they are today. Then we move sort of into the planning engagement where we're looking at different scenarios and we're trying to decide the best way forward for that particular client. Then we move into sort of an implementation phase. And of course, then we review the client, whether that's, quarterly or annually. But the point here when we think about client takeaways is to be mindful that they are on this journey and that they at different points in the journey, we want to give them different takeaways that really talk to where they're at. And while we're thinking about that, we also need to think about the ways in which we share information with clients. If we think in the past it was a financial plan or a report, but now it could be a printed document, it could be report sharing digitally, it could be sharing via client portal. We're seeing the rise of videos where planners are, recording and sharing that with clients, or presentations. If we think of just of AI and AI summaries and how that's being shared with clients, there's a lot of different ways that we can share information with them. And it reminds me just a day or two ago, we were meeting with a planner who's new to Asset Map and he had taken his first client through Asset Map. And at the end of the meeting, she said, "Can I just take a photo of that?" And which is always great to hear because obviously she saw value in that. She wanted to take that with her immediately. And the planner said, "No, I'll email that across to you." But the point is about thinking about and being mindful of in that session, do we print an extra page? Is that what the client takes with them? Or what are the things that we're covering in each of these steps along this journey? And how do we bring that in to the client takeaways that we share with them? So to summarize that, we want to make sure that the information we're sharing or the artifacts that we are creating are visual and engaging, just like they were in the meeting, that they're delivered in a way that the client prefers, that we're using, and that could be multiple different mediums. And most importantly, that it's relevant to where the client is in that journey, that it speaks to that component. So we want to start by thinking about if you were to redesign your client takeaways for the steps in your process, how would you go about doing that? What are the steps that you could follow? And I think the very first step is looking at your client process. So, everyone here has their own and it's unique and unique to your practice, but to think through what are the steps in our client journey. And then for each of those steps, think about what are the things that I'm sharing with the clients then, and what would be an engaging and useful takeaway that I can give to the client post that engagement? And what method do I want to use? What medium do I want to share it in? And then lastly, to bring that into your process, to automate it and streamline it. And today we're going to talk a little bit more about how you can do that in Asset Map, but it's about building the stencils that speak to that, about building report layouts so that we're reducing the clicks, as Benny mentioned, and streamlining the process, building those client portal permission sets that we're giving clients access to exactly what they need at those different points in the journey. So that's what we're going to go through today. And to start off with that, I thought it would be good to look at an example journey. So obviously you've got your own client journey that you're going through, but just to look at what an example journey could look like and what are the different things that we can cover in each of them. So if we think of the new client journey, we think of the steps along that process. We're starting off with that initial engagement. And there we're looking at how to, building the client's current asset map, or using stencils to explore everything the client has, what gaps they have, gathering more information. We're talking about things like initial priorities. These will probably change over time, but what are the initial priorities that the client came into that engagement with? And of course, we could be looking at signals. What is the signals telling us about where the client is red, amber, or green? So this is just an example client journey. Of course, you're going to have your own, but these are some of the things we'd be thinking about incorporating into that initial engagement with the client, as well as what we'd want to incorporate into the takeaway that we leave them with after that first initial engagement. Then when we move into the different planning scenarios, here we're looking at target map scenarios. We're looking at, what if you save more? What if another scenario if you spend less? What if we work a bit longer? What if we sell the business? And sharing all of those scenarios with the client could be the right artifact for the end of that meeting, as well as drafts. And this is something that is going to an enhancement that is coming soon as well, that we're bringing drafts into sidebar. So it's not, hidden, but you can easily access it and apply it to households. So watch out for that enhancement coming in the next couple of weeks. But drafts gives us the ability to show alternative scenarios to clients. What it would look like if we made certain changes to their picture. And drafts is extremely powerful, especially in cases where there's lots of change. If we think about, clients transitioning, and there's a marriage, or there's a client retiring, drafts is a great way of just reflecting a lot of change in a simple way and showing the client, this is how your picture is going to differ. So these are great examples of things that we can include in our artifacts after that planning scenarios conversation. Then if we move into implementation, here again, we're going to add in target maps, but this is going to be slightly different. It's not all the scenarios, but rather the ones that we've agreed to move forward on with the client, the ones that we are actioning. And it's also a great place to bring in notes. Now, notes is another one that could be incorporated as an artifact in any one of these stages, but it's also going to evolve as we move through the client journey. In the initial engagement, the notes might be more around, their goals and who they are and what's important to them. But as we move through the scenarios, it could start talking more about what actions we've agreed, what things we're implementing. So notes is a great introduction there as well. So this is just to give you a sense of what that process could look like. If I map out the steps in my process, thinking about what am I engaging with the client in each of those steps, and how do I bring that into the artifacts that I share with them post that engagement. Then if that was the new client journey, let's think a little bit about review. Now we have actually talked through this 2x2 in a previous webinar before, but I'm just going to touch on it as a reminder today. But the thinking behind it is that reviews can fit into, there's different conversations we could be having at review depending on things that are happening in the client's life or in the plan. So for example, you'll see on the top left quadrant, that represents there's been a change in the client's life. Or the bottom left quadrant represents there's been a change in something that we've implemented. On the right-hand side, this is where there has been no changes. And depending on where the client fits into one of these quadrants, the review conversation is going to be different. And therefore, the takeaway that we share with them afterwards would also be different. Just talk through a couple of examples here. In that top left quadrant, we're talking about something's changed, like the client's got married or divorced, or there's a retirement. And the bottom left, we're thinking about things like price change, tax changes, benefit changes, things that would impact the plan. And both of those scenarios, we would probably go through that full new client process again, where we start by, okay, let's understand the impact on where you are now based on these changes or based on the product changes. Let's understand the impact on the scenarios that we work through and whether we need to make any changes to help the client move forward. Where it gets a little bit different is when we move to the right-hand side and we think about what if there are no changes? We sit down for review with the client and everything is in place. There's no changes in their life. The products that we implemented are all on track and the client is on track in terms of what they want to achieve. This gives us a great opportunity to bring in new conversations, to go to that next level of depth with the clients and unpack additional information. And some great examples of this is planners will have a theme for the year. So they'll say, for 2026, every review with a client, we're going to go through beneficiaries. and work through it with the client, make sure they know who is the beneficiary on each of the financial products that they have, who gets what, is it reflecting their wishes, are there updates we need to make? Or the focus could be on the will. We want to this year review every client's will, make sure it's in place, and make any changes that need to happen. So that's a great examples of additional things we can bring in, not only to the client engagement, but also to the takeaway that we share with the client post that engagement. And then on the bottom right, it's always about reconnecting with the plan. You can use that as an opportunity to say, are we both on the same page and have a shared understanding around what our plan is for certain events? And there's some, additional things we can include in that, which I'll talk to now. So if we just summarize that and say, if those are the different types of review conversations I could be having, one where there is changes and one where there isn't changes, then where there are changes, we'll probably go through that exact same approach. Initial engagement, planning scenarios, agreed implementation, and our artifacts or client takeaways will represent that. But where there are no changes, here we really want to reconnect to the plan, but also delve in a bit deeper. And maybe that's including things like beneficiaries report or financial fire drills, which we chatted about in the focus series last month, where we looked at different frameworks. The financial fire drills is a great framework to work through with the client to check in on, do we understand what our plan is in the event of a death or someone becoming disabled, or what we're using for retirement, what changes do we need to make? So bringing these in where there's no changes is a great way of just, taking that conversational engagement just to that next level. Other examples of that is including relationship maps or even legal contracts that you've listed with the client, whether that's the will or letter of wishes. That's a nice conversation to add here as well. So if we think through those steps that I mentioned right up front, we've now, mapped out a example, new clients and review process. We've also checked in on what are the things we having or including in the conversation with the client, and what do we want to include in our client takeaways for each of those steps. But the third step is really about building that into your process. And that is building, stencils and templates and report layouts and client portal permission sets so that you can very quickly and easily select that and generate what you need for the client. Now, there are lots of other mediums of sharing information. I'm just focusing on reporting and sharing it via the client portal today in AssetMap, but there are, of course, other ways that you can share as well. So I'm just going to flip over into AssetMap real quick and then take you through those options. Right. So if you're in AssetMap on a particular household, and it can be any household, you can make the changes on any household in reports and create your layouts. It will apply across all of your households. So I've just gone into the James family, but if we have a look here, I can select this reports tab, and that brings me here onto this page. Now, just the functionality in this reports tab, it gives me the ability to select which chapters I want to include in my report or deselect what I want to exclude from my report. But you can also reorder chapters. I can move sections up or down so that the report is in the order and layout that I want. Another point to mention here under Asset Map, you'll notice it always says default. The default view of the map is always spouses or partners, but of course you can create additional asset map layouts where I could have an individual by themselves or perhaps a trust and a business on a page. So I would always encourage you to, once you've created a household, to set up those layouts right up front of what you would want to report on later. It just means you're saving clicks again, and that could be an individual by themselves or two individuals on a page. And then here you can just select what you want to include. But you can also save report layouts. So you'll see here under this dropdown, you can create different report layouts that speak to the steps in your process. So using that example process, I've created a report layout for initial engagement. And in there, I've included, just the asset map, priorities, and signals. But because I've created the layout, it's in the order I want already. Everything that I want selected is already selected. Now, of course, I can still add for a specific client and bring in other conversations, but it just gives you a great starting point to have that all selected already and in the order you want, saving on those clicks. All right, From initial engagement, I've also brought in planning scenarios where I've included target maps. So I want to show the client all the scenarios that we've worked through so I can quickly and easily generate that. And then agreed implementation where the target maps will change a little bit because I'll only include the ones that we've agreed to move forward on, and maybe even include notes as well. So you can see here that I can create as many of these layouts that reflect the different types of reports I want to share with clients, and that can be based on the different points in my client's journey. To create these report layouts, you simply select the chapters that you want to include, you move them into the order that you want by just dragging and dropping, and then over here, you'll click on this save button. If I save, it'll override the layout that I'm on, or I can save as, where I can give the layout a name, and I can even select it as my default layout, so that's the first one that comes up when I click on a household report. Another point to mention here is that we also have report history, where you can view any reports generated for a particular household, and you can always refer back to them. So you can download past reports, share them to the client portal, but you can view all reports here under history. The other point I want to mention here under the reports is you'll notice in all the layouts that I created, there was a few reports here at the bottom that I didn't include by default, things like the balance sheet and the policy summary. And I think these are really powerful reports for specific clients. They're great ones to tick to include as and when needed. The balance sheet is a great report that shows, for everyone in the household, a column. It'll show all their assets, liabilities, and net worth across the household. The key thing, tip if I can mention here, is to only select the individuals you want to include in that report. If there's children without financials, or, even in this case, the pets, you don't necessarily have to select all of them in the balance sheet. Select it for the individuals you want. Similarly with the policy schedule, this is great for a client that's got lots of different risk benefits that you want to look at, but it's also great in that you can select who you want to generate it for, as well as what product lines you want to incorporate. So if the client only has life cover, you can just select life insurance. Or if you want to zone in on a conversation around legal, what legal documents the client has, you can just select that section. Okay. All right, so that is on report layouts, and I really encourage you to go in, bold, your report layouts, move the chapters around, select what you want to include, and save those as layouts. Then if we look at client portal, we can mirror what we're doing in the report layouts for client portal permission sets. And to do that, I just click here on household, and you'll see there's a new pop-up here called client portal. If I click on the three dots here, I can select preferences, and this gives me the ability to create different permission sets. So if I click on the drop down here, you'll see that there are always these three that are system generated permission sets that are available to use for a client, but I can create my own. So I've also created, based on my example client journey, an initial engagement permission set that just includes the asset map, the ability for them to suggest changes, as well as signals and for me to share reports with them. But I can then create other permission sets for maybe the next step in the journey or the following step, or when I'm reviewing a client and there's changes or no changes, I can create permission sets that reflect what I want to include in that. To create a permission set, you simply select create new, you name it, and you select what you want to include in that particular permission set. And then to apply these permission sets to clients, you'll see here on this page where it says client portal. If I click on that, it'll show me everyone in the household. Also shows me the status of the client portal, if they're active or if they never registered or if they're inactive. And it allows me to select what permission sets they currently can view and when they last logged in. But now I can simply click on this pencil here, and I can go ahead and change the permission set to the next one and update. And then the client will see whatever I've included in that permission set on their client portal. So you can manage this over time and shift the access that clients see based on where they are in the journey. Yes. And then I just want to show one other thing on reporting customization. Just going to go over here. So just in terms of the current report and generation, if you want us to update the logo on your report, you can simply share that logo with us and we can update the logo on your reports. And on the map itself, sorry, this is right at the bottom of the asset map, you'll see that there is a disclaimer here. This disclaimer is completely editable. If you just share that with us, what you would like preferred there, we can update it on your profile. And we've got a sample one that we can share with you. So please just let us know if you ever want to update that. And then right on the very last page, you'll see it's a disclosure document. And this is also completely customizable. So whatever you would prefer in there, you can share with us and we can update that on your behalf. All right, I'm going to just switch over to Anne. Stop share. To close off for today, yeah, you could, one takeaway from today's session is just think about those steps in your process. What are the things that you're covering? What can you bring into the client takeaway that you share, or the artifact that you create that talks to that and that creates that engaging conversation post the meeting as well? And then build it into asset map. Add those report layouts, add those stencils, create those client portal permissions, and then curate that journey for clients. Thank you very much.